little over 4.5 years ago, on Christmas Day, 2021, a rocket launched from Kourou in French Guiana. That's right there on the equator, or near the equator. The payload for that rocket was the James Webb Space Telescope, often referred to by its initials JWST. Now that launch was originally scheduled for the year 2007, okay? So it had like an 18-year overrun. The project cost about $11 billion of your tax dollars by the time it was completed. That represents about an $8 billion cost overrun from the original projection for that project, okay? A lot of people worked on that project for a long time. Yours truly is one of them. For 2 years, I was down in Lanham and Goddard Space Flight Center down there, and that's a brief interlude. Most people worked on that job. That was the premier job on that entire campus, and I think on a lot of NASA campuses for several decades, a long, long time. They had a few other smaller things, but that was what most people were working on. It was a big deal. I worked on something called the Integrated Science Instrument module. That was, I helped design 2 power supplies. I had very little to do with that in comparison to most people. But if you worked on it, you got your name on a plaque that on one of the covers that they put on that thing. So my name's there up in space, you know, like anybody would care, right? Okay. So along with a whole plethora of other people, by the way. Okay. It might interest you that the Mission Operations Center, the MOC, that runs JWST, that's where they give it the daily commands and what to go stare at and what to look at and what instruments to use to process the images, is right here across town in Baltimore on the campus of Johns Hopkins University. Now, if the $11 billion of your tax money, and by the way, that was back when $11 billion was actually worth something, okay? You know, it was since COVID and all that, you know, you know, but that is actually a lot of money. Everyone should be interested in JWST. You may have seen it in the news. Doesn't seem like it's as heavily covered as the Hubble was when the Hubble first went up. And there's a reason that NASA and the US government were willing to suffer an 18-year schedule slip and an $8 or $9 billion cost overrun to keep this project going. There's something very, very, very important that they just had to have, that the people who call the shots at NASA just had to have. They had to know. But practically speaking, cost and schedule overruns can be explained by just the sheer technical challenge of what the James Webb Space Telescope is. This thing is a modern marvel. It has a mission duration of about 5 to 10 years. If it goes past 5 years, I guess they consider that gravy. That's actually pretty short, especially for something that's, you know, took so long to build and cost so much money. It weighs a little over, it weighs a little under 7 tons, 6.8 tons or so. It's got these 18 beryllium mirrors that are coated with gold. Gold is good for reflecting infrared light, which is what this thing needs to do. About 500 atoms thick, just to keep it light. Really, really, really thin. Okay. Each one of those mirrors, this thing had to unfold in space when it got up there. It unfolds kind of like my coffee table at home. Those 18 beryllium mirrors are originally folded up to fit in the rocket, and then it unfolds. The reason that launch was in French Guiana, by the way, is French Guiana is near the equator, and the equator needed to sling this rocket up so they didn't need to use as much fuel to get it where it needs to go, which is called the Lagrangian number 2 point, which is a point in space opposite the sun from the Earth, on the other side of the Earth from the sun, where the Earth's gravity equals the sun's gravity, and that's a stable point, and they can keep it orbiting that point, and they can, as the sun goes around, as the Earth goes around the sun, JWST stays in sync with that and looks out into the universe as it goes along. It needed to be at that point about 1 million miles away from the Earth. just under 1 million miles. It needs to be super cool. You see those shields there? Oh, I'm here talking and I'm not doing my job again. Doggone it. All right. So yeah, so it needs to be very, very cool because it's looking in the infrared region, not so much in visible light, but more towards the infrared. If you've ever looked through an infrared camera, you know, if there's any heat source nearby, it'll flood the image and you won't be able to look at what you're trying to look at. So they're trying to pick out very, very tiny signals. So anything on the spacecraft itself that had much temperature at all would overwhelm the signal if they didn't keep it really cool. So most of the instrumentation is running at about 50 degrees Kelvin. That's 50 degrees above absolute zero. That's something like minus 270 degrees Fahrenheit. They achieve that passively just with those sun shields there. Those sun shields, there's 5 of them. They're about the size of a tennis court. They unfold. And if you go from shield to shield to shield, from the outer surface of the top shield to the inner surface of the bottom shield, there's almost 600 degrees across those things. All that just to keep, and then there needs to be a cryo cooler on top of that to keep some of the instrumentation all the way down to within like 4 degrees above absolute zero. I mean, those mirrors, those 18 mirrors, when they unfold, they have to focus to set this thing up. They have to be precise to within 1/10,000th of the thickness of a human hair. So this thing is just like, you can go, there are things that had to get invented in the 25 years that this thing was under development and engineering to pull this feat off. It is to the glory of man to be able to create an instrument and put that up in space. You know, I quote Solomon there, who says, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it is to the glory of kings to search out a matter." Well, we're like kings. We get to search out what God has put out there in the universe that he's concealed, and he's allowing us to see that. At least that was the hope, right? My biggest fear in having worked on this job was that, everybody's fear, I think, was that if it didn't work, that was an $11 billion piece of space junk out there. And the condemnation that would have fell upon NASA would have been, I think, like a death knell for it. So there was a lot riding on this. I was very, you don't want to be the one to blame that the thing that you worked on was the thing that failed and caused that thing not to work. But it did work. God allowed it to work, I think, for a reason, and we're going to get into that here, okay? And I'm not up here telling you about JWST just to geek out on all of its technical prowess, okay? Marvelous as that is. I have a much more important reason to talk about it this morning, okay? You see, JWST was designed to answer some very important questions about our universe, questions that have to do with how everything began, and whether or not we can trust our Bibles, or whether science can finally, for once and for all, render our faith obsolete. Again, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, to search out a matter is the glory of kings. JWST could be a noble pursuit, but it wasn't conceived to glorify God. It was designed to show for once and for all that he's irrelevant. People who are my age or older will know who the guy up here is. Anybody remember his name? Come on now. Jerry? No? Who? No. Carl Sagan. Who said that? So you're not even, are you old enough to remember him talking on TV? Shame on you older folks. That's a younger man there. Okay. Yeah, there's a battle going on, a battle of two worldviews, right? On the one side, there's guys like this guy. He's the secular atheist side. He's dead now. Ironically, he died in 1996, the same year that JWST engineering got started in earnest. But for at least 2 decades, during the 80s and the 90s, this guy was the leading expositor of evolutionary cosmology for the masses, okay? He had a famous TV documentary called The Cosmos. He wrote many books. He was interviewed all the time. He was all in the media at that time. He was a household word back in that day, even if some don't remember it here. I researched him. He said his TV show alone is estimated to have reached 500 million viewers in over 60 countries. 500 million viewers in over 60 countries. You talk about being an evangelist for evolutionary cosmology. This guy was it. He seemed like the very voice of reason. He presented highly technical things in a very entertaining and easy to understand way. People loved it, okay? They ate it up. And of course, he came across as being purely scientific. He was very rational and take everything to its ultimate conclusion. He was famously quoted, he was controversial, and he was famously quoted as saying is that the universe, the cosmos, is all that ever is or ever was or ever will be. He further said that the nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies were made in the interiors of collapsing stars. We are made of star stuff. Not much room for God in all that, is there? Okay. As the famous philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, God is dead. That's that worldview. Now, of course, there's another worldview, a biblical worldview, that tells a very different story about how we got here and how it all began, right? Our Bible starts out with, in the beginning, God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Lest you think that, okay, well, God did it, but he probably just used the processes that Carl Sagan was talking about and his cohorts to explain the universe, okay? Purely scientific processes, the Big Bang and all that. If you think that, you better read it down a little bit further in the Bible's first chapter, where it says, and God, starting in verse 14 of the first chapter, God said, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times, and days and years, and let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater to govern the day, and the lesser to govern the night. He also made the stars. How do you like that? He also made the stars. Incidentally, he also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. You see, the biblical account specifies that the sun, the moon, and the stars were created after the earth itself was created. Okay? That alone, never mind the vast disagreement on timescales, like 14 billion years versus 6 days, renders the Bible's account of creation as a pure fairy tale. Okay? Something you tell little kids maybe, but utter nonsense from a scientific standpoint. Right? The Bible also identifies the agent of creation. The Gospel of John opens in such a way that's similar to Genesis. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. Or your version of the Bible may say, has not overcome it. Both are true. Both are very profound thoughts. Okay, so we have these two diametrically opposed, competing views on how the universe began. But what are the facts? Never mind that. Just what are the facts? What do we observe out there? You all have heard of Albert Einstein. Between 1907 and 1915, Einstein developed his general theory of relativity. The theory was counterintuitive to most people, but every time they had a way of testing it, it proved correct, which of course redounded to the great respect and renown and admiration for Mr. Einstein. Okay. Now, one of the ramifications of that theory when he developed it was that the universe was either going to all collapse into a massive black hole, and we'd all just die as we passed the event horizon of that black hole, or it was going to continuously expand into a thermal death, where everything was just going to keep expanding and burn out, and that's actually what Sagan believed, by the way. And Einstein didn't like either of those ideas. And he lived in a time when most scientists didn't like those ideas either. He wanted a steady state universe. He wanted everything that was out there to be static, staying in place, nothing changing, and he just thought of the universe as being eternally having been in that state. So he introduced, without any scientific justification, a fudge factor, a cosmological constant, into his equations to keep the universe in steady state, so it didn't contract and it didn't expand. Okay, but as big telescopes started exploring the universe in the 1920s, by the time 1931 rolled around, a lot of people were saying, hey, Mr. Einstein, you need to look at what these astronomers are observing. It looks like everything is moving away from us. And the leading astronomer of that time, a man as different from Einstein as you can get, Edwin Hubble, you see him up there, you know, where Einstein is this disheveled guy with bad hair, doesn't care about his appearance, you know, not very athletic. This guy was the exact opposite of that. He's a collegiate scholar, an athlete, educated in law at Cambridge, and just a man of letters, you know. You see him there smoking his pipe. Well, he also became an astronomer out at the Mount Wilson Observatory, and he was the first guy to really document the fact that the universe does appear to, in fact, be expanding. Everything we look at is redshifted, meaning it's moving away from us. Redshift means like the Doppler effect, right? You know that when a car is coming towards you, it sounds higher pitched than after it passes you and it's moving away. That's because the sound waves are hitting you faster as it's moving, and they're hitting you slower as it's moving away because the sound waves are in part carried by the speed of the vehicle relative to where you are. So that's true with light too. If it's blue shifted, that would be like it's coming towards you. If it's red shifted, that means the object that emanated the light is moving away from you. And everything out there is red shifted. And the further out the objects are, the galaxies, the more red shifted they are. So in other words, the further out you go, the faster they're receding from us, which is totally unexpected. Einstein had a hard time believing it. They invited him out to the Mount Wilson Observatory. And I didn't make this cartoon up here. This is, you know, you can tell it's a joke in the physical world among physicists and so forth that Einstein had to be convinced like this. You see Mr. Hubble back there with his characteristic pipe, you know, letting Einstein have a look through the telescope, and Einstein is saying, "Oh my God, the universe is expanding." And Mr. Hubble says, "I told you that before." And then the guy with the Andy Cap hat, who's just a technician, says, "You can't be right all the time, man." You know, so that's kind of how it was funny. Einstein was embarrassed. Einstein called it the biggest mistake, not of his career, but of his life. He really hated the fact that he got that wrong. So it does appear that the universe is expanding, right? Whether you're an evolutionist or a creationist, we all have to admit that it does appear that the universe is expanding. What you see here is not a picture of the expanding universe, it's a timeline. You know how we have our biblical timelines, you know, creation here, and then the fall, and then the flood, and then all that, right? Well, this is like that, except this span is about 13.8 billion years, okay? So it's natural, isn't it, to think that, well, if everything's expanding, can't you extrapolate that back in time? And everything that's moving away from us would have been closer and closer and closer. And it seems like if you extrapolate that back far enough, everything should come together. And boy, it's very natural to come up with the Big Bang Theory, right? That it all started from a single point and then boom, it expanded all out, right? That's kind of a natural thing to think if you leave God out of it. And God's special revelation, which we call our Bible, the biblical story in Genesis, the account of it. So here you have that timeline. On the left is the quantum fluctuation that started it all. Nobody knows if you want to put God anywhere, you put him right there. He caused the quantum fluctuation, right? But then after that, everything occurred by natural processes. No God need apply. You don't need God after that. Everything else was just mechanistic physical processes So the universe goes through a stage where everything's dark. There's nothing, but there's not even atoms that have formed yet. There's nothing, there's just this plasma, this super hot plasma. And then when that plasma finally cools enough to where the first atoms, hydrogen, the simplest atom, one proton, one electron forms, energy is given off. And that's that little afterglow light pattern you see there at 375,000 years, like less than 500 million years after the Big Bang. There's this event that they think occurred where there was this flash, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. That caused certain things. But then there was dark ages for about at least 500 million years. This is how the theory goes. 500 million to 1 billion years, right? When matter hadn't coalesced yet to form the first stars, to emit the first light, and the first stars coalesced into the first galaxies, and all that happened. And they think there's basically 3 different stages of star development. There's the population 3 stars that developed first and consisted only of light elements, hydrogen, helium, and lithium, the first 3 on the periodic chart. And then after that, those stars exploded and spewed their matter out into the universe, and then that coalesced again and created other stars. Now you had the heavier elements in there, all right? And then they exploded again, and then that was population 2, and then population 1 stars happened. That's why Carl Sagan said we're all made of what came from exploding stars. Okay, that's the only way you can get heavy elements in the astronomical world are not like the heavy elements that they're trying to get from China right now. We're just talking about simple things like oxygen and nitrogen and carbon. Astronomically, those are considered heavy elements, okay, that weren't there in the original stars, okay? So the galaxies evolved over time, and it's interesting, that afterglow light pattern up there that happened less than 500 million years into the evolution of all this, after that quantum fluctuation, the theory predicted that created something called cosmic microwave background radiation. Now, they predicted that with the theory, and then they went out and looked for it, and you know what? Sure enough, they found it. They found what the theory predicted. You got to give them that, right? Back in 1978, 2 radio astronomers, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, they found what the Big Bang theory predicted. The image you see here is not exactly what they found after. They were given the 1978 Nobel Prize for Physics for that discovery. What you see here is a further confirmation of the background radiation. There was a particular spacecraft called the Planck spacecraft that was sent up to map out the whole universe. They had already done that. They mapped it out again, and they're looking at background radiation. Stuff that shouldn't really be there if you had ever had a steady state universe. There'd just be nothing in the background, but there is a little something in the background, and that's what they detected. And the difference between the blue and the dark red that you see there is less than 1/1,000,000th of a degree heat difference because of that radiation. That's how fine the instrumentation had to be to detect this stuff, but they detected it, and these guys won a Nobel Prize for it. And that has been taken as virtual proof of the Big Bang theory up until JWST launched. Okay, now back to our telescope. Our beloved telescope. Why did the scientific community so desperately want JWST when they already had Hubble? Okay, Hubble was beautiful. The images that came from Hubble, frankly, they're more beautiful than what comes from JWST, because Hubble is tuned to see the visible light spectrum. What you would see if your eyes had the telescopic magnification to see what was out there. The bandwidth of the light that it detected is the same bandwidth, plus a little bit in the ultraviolet, plus a little bit in the infrared, a little bit beyond what you can see, but primarily centered on the visible light spectrum, just as you as a human being would see something, okay? What JWST is all about is proving the Big Bang theory. And to prove the Big Bang theory, cosmologists need to see the redshifted light. Hubble didn't see very much of that, okay? They wanted to see way further over in the redshifted spectrum, because then they're looking at the farthest objects away from us. the most redshifted light coming from the farthest galaxies, and the light from the farthest galaxies takes the longest time to get to us. So let's say a galaxy formed 1 billion years after that first quantum fluctuation that started the Big Bang, and it took 13 billion years to get to us. Okay, that means we're looking at the universe as it was 13 billion years ago. And that's what they wanted to see. In other words, JWST is looking back in time at the early universe. That's its purpose. And why did they want to do that? They wanted to, their scientific inquiry, that's a noble pursuit, nothing wrong with that. But in particular, they were very, very interested in putting the cherry on top of the proof of the Big Bang Theory. They wanted to nail it. They'd already had that cosmic microwave background radiation that sure looked like they were on the right track. And some people, that's proof enough. But no, they wanted to look back early into the first galaxies, and their prediction was, what you see in the red box there, is that there would be fewer and fewer galaxies beyond a redshift of about 14. That's lights that shifted in frequency 14 times. And that the earliest galaxies would be very low mass, not much stars had clumped together yet. They'd be clumpy and irregular. They wouldn't have those nice spiral arms that you see on a lot of the pictures, or a disk or anything like that. That takes like 1 billion years to develop, or 500 million years to develop, okay? And interestingly, because there was only hydrogen, helium, and lithium, the 3 lightest elements available for the first formation of the first stars, that's all those stars would contain. And they have spectrometers on board JWST that looks at the light, doesn't send it through a diffraction grating, but it basically breaks it up into its components, and that can identify the elements that are producing the light that they're seeing. Okay, and they predicted that that would have no heavy elements, no oxygen, no nitrogen, no carbon, nothing like that. Just hydrogen, helium, lithium, okay. Now there's a creationist who's associated with Answers in Genesis. His name is Dr. Jason Lisle. He also has his own ministry going. I believe it's called Creation Science Institute. He was so confident that the Big Bang Theory is wrong that before the results came in, he predicted exactly the opposite of what they predicted. He predicted that there would be lots of galaxies when they looked at great distances, even beyond redshift 14. He predicted that the farthest ones would be fully formed, massive, well-structured, and he said that they would show evidence of heavy elements. Okay. So he had exactly, this is a creationist who predicted exactly the opposite of what the body politic in cosmology was pretty agreed upon that they would see. Well, the verdict is in. JWST has been sending images back for about 3 years now. You understand, this is hot off the press. This is why I want to present this to you guys, is that most of people in the world aren't, this kind of stuff takes years to sink in, but this stuff has happened in the pretty recent past, okay? What you're looking at here is something they called the ultra-deep field. Hubble looked at the same thing. They picked out the spot that was like darkest out there in the universe where no stars were around, just a blank, empty space from the standpoint of every other telescope that could ever look at something, where there should have been nothing, and they just let the telescope stare there for a long time, okay? Long time was, this particular image was like 100 hours of exposure time using different instruments over 11 days, just staring at this. Hubble had done the same thing, found about 7,500 galaxies out there. Beautiful. It was amazing when that happened. Okay, they picked that same spot in the universe to have JWST stare at that exact same spot. JWST found 2,500 more galaxies in that same exposure image because JWST could see what Hubble could not. It could see those extremely redshifted galaxies, and sure enough, there they were. What were they like? Well, there were lots of them, not just a few. Well beyond redshift 14, almost to redshift 20. Unheard of, nothing like what was expected. Not only that, they're well-formed. They're not these small, baby-looking galaxies. They're mature, adult-looking galaxies out there that at times that was within a fraction of a billion years after the Big Bang. That should not have been. The theory says, no, that can't happen, okay? And guess what? They contained heavy elements, just like Dr. Jason Lau predicted, okay? So the verdict is in. Hundreds of extremely redshifted galaxies, many beyond redshift 14, almost out to 20, supposedly dating to less than a billion years after the Big Bang, if you believe the Big Bang, okay? They're massive and fully formed, totally unexpected, and they contain heavy elements. Again, totally unexpected. So Lyle was right. Now I'm going to go a little more. That's not all. There's something else. This is going to be a little bit harder to explain, but please stick with me. I'll try to, I don't explain, look, I don't understand all the math behind that, I haven't researched all that. I'm getting this from others, but I believe it's irrefutable in the scientific community, okay? There's actually most people misunderstand the Big Bang. They think it's, like you see there on the right, a hand grenade exploding, right? So there's this, space already exists, there's this hand grenade, and the quantum fluctuation would be like the hand grenade exploding, and all the shrapnel from the hand grenade is emanating out into space, and the fastest pieces move the farthest, and all that kind of stuff. That's how most people conceive of the Big Bang. The Big Bang theory cannot be that. It wasn't formulated to be like that. You know why? Because if you extrapolate all the shrapnel back, it doesn't all come to the same point. They miss each other, okay? So to get around that, they have the expanding blueberry muffin model, okay, where the galaxies are like the blueberries, right? Okay, if you can't extrapolate the blueberries all back to the center of the muffin, right? They're just where they are when you bake the muffin, and then the muffin expands, right? And so everything, moves away. Every blueberry moves away from every other blueberry. Everything's redshifted like you would expect, okay? But it's so key, so absolutely key, that you understand that space-time itself is expanding. What is space? Space is nothing, right? Well, it doesn't seem like it's nothing because Einstein showed that gravity can warp it. Gravity can warp it in such a way that when light passes through it, it bends according to the warp that gravity has created. So space is something. We don't know what that something is. We call it space-time, and that would be like the dough of that muffin. Okay, so that's the thing that's different than the exploding hand grenade model. In the exploding hand grenade model, space is already existing, space-time, and there's this thing in it that has a quantum fluctuation, explodes out and creates everything, okay? The muffin model says, no, space itself is expanding with all the galaxies. Very, very key difference. And that difference leads to two different predictions. If it's true that the hand grenade model is the way to go. But when you look at a galaxy and move it further and further away from you, its view to you should get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. It's just a matter of perspective, right? But on the other hand, if space-time itself is expanding, if you have the blueberry muffin model, then out to about a redshift of about 1.6, perspective dominates and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But then after that, as you move it further away, it's like moving a magnifying lens away from, a book, and you watch the letters get larger and larger and larger. So it would get larger as they got beyond that. Well, JWST could look at this, and guess what? It agrees with, wrong one, the exploding hand grenade model. So it's the winner. But it can't be a winner either because I already told you that they can't have the exploding hand grenade model because if you extrapolate back to the Big Bang, the shrapnel all misses each other. You can't extrapolate it back to a single point. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the Big Bang theory is in utter shambles. There's no way to make it work. And some cosmologists, you look on YouTube these days, you see the evidence of that. You see some cosmologists trying to save it, especially the ones that are heavily invested in it monetarily. That's where the research dollars come from to prop that theory up. They're explaining it away. They're saying, well, galaxies formed faster than we thought. No, they can't form that fast. Your model doesn't allow for that. Okay, it's intellectual dishonesty. You see that on NASA's official website, by the way. Okay, many are abandoning it altogether, and they're coming up with these wildly fanciful, exotic models like, we're just like a rebounding black. We get sucked into black holes and whole new universes get created, and it just goes off into the weeds, right? Okay. Some are simply admitting there's a lot that we don't know. Okay. And that's the position that I think is the honest position. Better we just admit, like Job had to when God spoke to him out of a whirlwind after he'd gotten enough of Job's complaining and Job saying this and Job saying that. He took him to task and said, where were you? All right. The great founder, it's good to be humble about what you don't know, isn't it? Isaac Newton, one of the fathers of modern science, the Enlightenment in Western thought. At the end of his life, he wrote, I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay undiscovered before me. I believe that's the situation with mankind in the universe. Part of that theory of the Big Bang was there was dark matter. Nobody knows what it is, but that they had to put it there just to explain why things seem that not only are they moving faster the farther away, they're actually accelerating as, getting faster and faster the further away you get, okay? Nobody knows what dark matter is. It was all nonsense. To God be the glory. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words to the end of the world. Everybody knows that what is cannot. This is the nature of things. This is what Romans says is so damnable about mankind, is that if you look at what is created, you can, and you look at how marvelous it is, how irreducibly complex it is, you know that it cannot have created itself. And that should push you towards a God. But these guys keep trying to leave God out of everything. Wouldn't we benefit, what's out there, what JWST has revealed is part of the realm of what we as Christians call general revelation. That's the kind of stuff that God reveals to everybody in the world, whether or not they ever heard of the gospel, right? But wouldn't it benefit a man a lot more if he seeks out special revelation from God? Wouldn't you get so much farther along in your understanding of things like how everything began? I'm going to shift gears a little bit now. But that's what the wise men did. They looked at general revelation. They were stargazers. They looked out there at the stars, and they believed some special revelation that they had. Okay. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Now let me ask you a question. Why didn't the people in Jerusalem also marvel at this star? And before you go condemning the people of, well, they weren't spiritual enough, they should have known from prophet and blah, 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 blah. Even after that, they didn't follow the wise men over to Bethlehem. They didn't know which star it was. I submit to you, and I got this from Dr. Jason Lisle, Jason Lisle submits to you, that star, if you looked at it in the night sky, was nothing special. Just as Jesus, when he came into this world, he had no form or appearance that we should desire him. He was nothing special. Okay. What was different about those wise men, those magi, is that they were used to looking at the heavens. They understood what was supposed to be there, and when something went into it that wasn't supposed to be there, that meant something to them, so then they would go off and look for what that might mean. Okay, so let me ask you something. The stars, now we're in Baltimore, there's a lot of light pollution, okay? But when the stars come out at night, what direction are they rotating in? They come up in the east and they set in the west, right? Because the Earth's rotating in the opposite direction. So they're just like the sunrise, right? They're coming up in the east, right? Do they move relative to each other when that happens? No. They're all in perfect synchronization. It's as though you had a planetarium projector projecting up onto a spherical screen, and everything just moves in sync with everything else, except for 5 objects. Those are the planets. They don't move in synchronization because they're more in the foreground. They have different orbits that cause them to... You know what the word planet means? It means a wanderer. To the ancients, they looked up the sky and they saw, yep, all those constellations, they move in perfect synchronism with each other, except for these 5 objects. You know what they are? They're Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Those are the only objects, and the ancients knew that. They called them the planets, the wanderers. And if anything else came up, that had to have some meaning. And sure enough, there these guys are in the east. They say, we saw a star when we were in the east. And they saw something come up, and it came up in the direction of Israel over there. So they noticed something peculiar, and then they went back, and then they looked at their special revelation. What do we know? What's prophesied? Well, they had something to go on. What do you think that something was? I think it was this. I think it was the star prophecy that Balaam, okay? Genesis... No, it's not Genesis, this is Numbers. Numbers devotes a lot of time, a lot of verses to explaining what all happened between Balaam, this kind of a godless prophet, and you see the guy standing behind him there, that's Balak, he's the king of Moab. The Israelites have come through. They're terrorizing the whole Middle East by taking things over. They're in a town on the Jordan Valley called Shittim, and they're about to cross the Jordan and go attack Jericho. And Balak is up there in the mountains, and he's taking Balaam around to places that are closer and closer to the Israelite camp. And at every place he takes him 3 different times, he says, now curse him for me. And Balaam says, I can only say what the Lord gives me. And he blesses him instead. And after that happens for the 3rd time, and Balak is utterly disgusted with him, and Balaam says, wait, I got more to tell you. And he tells him this prophecy right here. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not now. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. He will crush the foreheads of Moab, that's your people, King Balak, the skulls of all the people of Sheth. Edom will be conquered, Seir, his enemy, will be conquered, but Israel will grow strong. A ruler will come out of Jacob and destroy the survivors of the city. Okay, so this is the famous star prophecy, and you should get to know it real well because it's an extremely significant event in the history of what all happened in the Old Testament. Daniel would have known about this prophecy. And Daniel was himself one of the Magi. He was one of the wise men of Babylon, which became Persia. He was the type of people that came to visit Christ when he was born. He was one of them. And he had that knowledge. He would have brought that knowledge with him, and they would have known about it. And when they saw that star rise, they said, oh, a star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. Okay? So, and as far as the timing, if you look at, Daniel's prophecy of the 70th week, when they looked further, they might have even dug up, oh yeah, that's supposed to happen about now. And sure enough, there it is. So they saddle up, and they would have taken it. But these were rich people, understand. These were men of renown. They would have had quite an entourage. That's why it caused quite an uproar when these guys came into Jerusalem. It says in the gospel that the whole city was in an uproar over it. Everybody was, whoa, what's going on? And yet they couldn't see the star. You know why they couldn't see the star? Because they didn't know what was supposed to be out there, right? These men, they were stargazers. That's what they did for a living. One of the things they did for a living. So when something unusual happened, they knew it, and then they looked for its significance. Sure enough, they found it, and they came to worship. Okay, so that star prophecy says 2 things about this ruler that's going to rise. He's got a star, he's represented by a star, and he's represented by a scepter. Now, the scepter is easy to associate. That means he's going to be a king. He's going to be the king of Israel, right? But what about the star? What did that mean? How would Balak have taken that? How would the ancients have taken that? What you see here are some different steels, I think, from the kings of Assyria. Don't know exactly which ones they are, but you see them there with those two implements in their hand. The king has a scepter he's holding in the bottom picture and in the top picture. And in the bottom picture, he's worshiping his star god. That star out in front of him, that's his god. Okay. In the top picture, there's a little, what I have circled in red there, that's another star if you zoom in on it. So the ancients understood that they associated their gods with being like stars. Okay. So what Balak was saying was that there's going to be a god and a king coming out of a god king, a king who's also God, or a god to him, but a god king. And what did the wise men come to do? They said, where is the one who has been born king of the Jews? They knew he was a king, and they said, we've come to worship him as a god. They were also coming to look for a god king. So this is very, very significant. You know, Jesus, at almost the very end of the Bible, in Revelation 22, he calls himself a star. He calls himself two things, the root and offspring of David. What's the significance of that? David was a king. He's the rightful king, the heir on the throne from David's line. He's a king and the bright and morning star. And again, star means he's God. He's claiming at the very end of the book to be the star king, the God king, right? What I'm showing you there on the left are some coins from the Jewish revolt. Simon Bar Kokhba, they took Rome. This is after Titus sacked Rome, and Jews were still there, and they were still causing trouble. They still had a revolt. I think it lasted about 2 years. And one of the things they did was they took Roman coins. They kept the valuable part of them, but on top of the coin was, I think, like iron or something. They ground that down, and they re-imprinted their own symbol on there. What you see on that leftmost image there is an image of the temple with the Ark of the Covenant inside of it, and on top, I have denoted, there's a star. They were showing a star over top of the temple with the Ark of the Covenant in it. This is after Christ, in about, I think, 130-something AD, when Hadrian, that's when the Romans finally had enough. They put him down for the last time. They totally destroyed Jerusalem, rebuilt it as a Roman city, Aelia Capitolina, and they wouldn't even allow Jews in it anymore. They'd had enough. Okay, but and of course, the Star of David developed after Christ, actually. They didn't have that. That was not actually an Old Testament symbol to the best of our knowledge, I think. So we are ones who follow the star, the bright and morning star. Okay. And we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Daniel was told at the end of his dealings with God that multiples who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. I look at you, Fred Ruff, and I think of you. Those who lead many to righteousness. Okay. We'll always be sinners saved by grace, but we can shine like stars in heaven if we lead others to Christ here on earth now. That's not me saying that. That's God's word saying that. Okay. Wise men still follow that star. And that's the message for this morning. And of course, I'm way over time. I don't know what you want to do, Jerry. Should I just close in prayer? Okay. Okay. Heavenly Father, I have not brought out this morning all that your word has to say concerning stars, how you call each one by name and none of them is missing. Lord, in our day and age, we misuse the word awesome, but you are an awesome God. Awesome does not begin to describe you. I pray that, first of all, if there's anyone here who has not found that star, who has not found Christ, the Messiah, the God King, the one who is not only that, but as we were remembering him this morning, humbled himself. This person that ought to be worshiped allowed himself to be abused by his own creation. And in doing so, became not only our God, not only our King, but also our Savior. I pray that if anyone doesn't know the truth of that they would get about looking for him and understand and be saved. And then for the rest of us, Lord, help us to know. Help us to shine like stars someday, because here on earth, we told other people about who Jesus is. And that's my prayer. Now dismiss us with your good graces, we pray, in the name of that star, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.